morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining. At CIQ, we're focused on powering the next generation of software infrastructure, leveraging the capabilities of cloud, hyperscale, and HPC. From research to the enterprise, our customers rely on us for the ultimate Rocky Linux, Werewolf, and Apptainer support escalation. We provide deep development capabilities and solutions, all delivered in the collaborative spirit of open source.
Oh my goodness. Hello, 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 everybody. Thanks for being here. We are live, like literally live.
Literally live.
What?
Yeah, right next to you.
Right there. So Zane and I.
Virtual to Jonathan.
Oh.
There you are.
That's awesome. So Zane and I are actually in our office. We have an office in Reno, Nevada. So we got to spend a couple of days together chatting about the awesomeness of the company and where we're going and what we are doing here. And it's so good to be with you, Jonathan, because we're really excited to talk about Werewolf today. I do want to just throw out. Sorry, what?
It's just good to be here.
Oh,
it's probably a lot cooler where he is too.
It is 102 here, but it's dry.
It's really dry. It's not that hot here. It's climbing, but yeah, it will probably not catch up to you.
It's good. Good for you.
Yeah. The only thing that's really nice about that, though, is that when we, we'll go out to dinner in the evenings, as a team and a company, and when we come out, it's still warm.
It's warm.
It's nighttime, and it's still. I kind of like that. I enjoy it.
Normal.
Okay. Yeah. All right. It's normal.
I'm used to it.
All right, awesome. So if you guys are watching, hello, thank you for being here and welcome. We are going to dive into Werewolf and some new features and what's going on. But remember, if you have questions, just jot them in the comments below. We kind of have a little sidebar over here, so we will definitely get to them and answer them. And even if you're watching on the replay, go ahead and submit any questions or comments that you have. We are looking at that throughout the week as well. And then if you want to reach out to CIQ, it's super easy too, right? CIQ.com. There's lots of different places on our website where you can just send us a note, and it usually comes to me. So happy to reply to you and get you guys going. So Werewolf, it is not spelled typically, and I always laugh when internally, right? So one of us misspells Werewolf.
Or it gets auto-corrected for you. I had to go turn that off.
Seriously, I think we actually misspelled it in like a release somewhere as well, and it probably wasn't autocorrect.
Oh,
That's
sure.
Right. Yeah, give people a hard time. So yes, Werewolf. What is it, Jonathan, in the context of how we see it at CIQ?
Yeah, so thanks, Rose. Werewolf is a cluster provisioning system. It sometimes gets looped in with the cluster management conversation, but it's pretty lightweight in that regard. So Werewolf is built primarily for HPC, though it's useful in other contexts as well, for taking a set of hardware that you mostly want to all kind of behave the same and not have to worry about the state of the software and operating system on that hardware. You want one server that says how all of the nodes should behave, and then you just want to turn nodes on, and they just become a node in your cluster. So if we can, real quick, get the share that I've got running right now, just to have in the background, I can demonstrate. So this is a virtual machine that is not running, and I'm going to start it up, and this virtual machine is connected to my Werewolf server that is also, this is just, in a test environment. But this virtual machine doesn't have any disks associated with it. It doesn't have any capacity for storing local storage. You can do that with Werewolf, but you don't have to. And this node will just start up, ask the server what it should be doing, and get a Rocky Linux 9 image completely transparently over the network. And then, if this were a compute cluster or something, make itself available for use. And we don't have to just... Yeah, and all in memory. Again, you can do stuff with local disks, but the whole point here is if something goes wrong with your node, you should be able to turn it off, turn it back on, and it will be back in the state that it was originally without you having to worry about what happened to it while it was running.
So Igor did ask why it's called Werewolf, and I don't remember the story.
So yeah, this comes from, first it's where because it's like software. So that's why it is spelled strangely, and then or that side of it is, and then the wolf is a reference to the Beowulf cluster, and I'm too young to know why Beowulf clusters are called Beowulf clusters, but the Beowulf cluster was the pattern of building for typically research, especially academic research at a university. Building a compute cluster out of a bunch of desktop class hardware. So you would see these photos. I've had one in a recent presentation as well of these baker's racks of just completely normal like Dell Optiplex towers, all plugged into a network and then used to do some kind of ensemble or cooperative computation or simulation. So yeah, that's it for this part of the demo. We can take this down for now, but we'll do more parts of it in a bit.
It was very quick. It came up very
Yes.
quick.
Yeah, it should be about as and this is just to put that in context. Running on both the server and the compute node there are running on, I think, a 15-year-old Dell server that is in my basement. So with actual networking and actual hardware, it's even faster.
Fantastic.
Oh, that's awesome. So you said something about you don't have to worry about the state.
Yes.
Can you explain that a little more?
So yeah, so typically, like if you just have your normal computer, the one that we likely each have sitting in front of us, there's the hardware, and it has like stateless memory, things that it loads into memory and then it loses power, it forgets all of that. But then there's the SSD or the hard drive or whatever, the thing that stores the information that's persistent from boot to boot. For most use cases, we want to save things on our computer and then turn our computer off and turn it back on and have that stuff still be there. In a clustered environment, usually the state you care about is somewhere else. It's in a shared file system somewhere. It's on a network share somewhere that all of the compute nodes have access to. But typically, you still deploy those servers, or historically, you still deploy those servers like you would normally. They have a hard drive or an SSD, and then you install the operating system onto it. And over time, as you make configuration changes or you upgrade things, that state you have to manage that state. You have to upgrade the software that's on it, or you have to change the configuration that's on it. And that's a stateful operation, is what we say. And that's fine for one computer, but when you have 10, 100, 1,000 computers, you have to worry about that state discretely on each one and make sure they all stay in sync, make sure they all stay the same. And that can become quite onerous. So Werewolf is a system. It's not the only system, but it's a pretty good and streamlined system for storing that desired state in one place on the Werewolf server, and then having the nodes get that from the server every time they turn on, rather than depending on their own local record of what it should be doing, what operating system it should be running, what software and what versions it has, what its configuration is.
That sounds super helpful.
Yes, I find it so.
Yeah.
So one of the things, Jonathan, that I've heard from, talking to different people, if they have older hardware, they're always concerned about, if you do all of this in memory, am I really starting to impact my cluster and the amount of memory I have available to actually do computation? Does that really matter? It doesn't seem like it takes as much memory as what you think that it would.
Ultimately, the amount of memory you're sacrificing to it is the size of the image that you're running, but that is something that we're working on. One of the things that I intend to give a demo of today is what we're calling, or what is called, a two-stage boot process for a different reason, for supporting larger image sizes than we've been able to support in the past. But as we were implementing that, it became very clear, oh, look, if you just changed this thing right here, then you could provision directly to local storage instead of to memory. And then you would still have stateless deployments where it's getting the image every time over the network, but instead of loading it into memory, it's just caching it onto some local disk. So we intend to alleviate that, that concern in the future. But the reality is, like, we're talking about a couple of gigabytes at most for most operating system images, and then other things can come over the network anyway. And servers have, this server that I'm running downstairs right now has 64 gigabytes of memory, and it's tiny. 128, 512, even terabyte or more of memory is not uncommon. So it is something that you have to be aware of, but it's less of a concern than it ever has been in the past, and we expect it to go away anyway.
Thank you.
Awesome. So what version of Werewolf are we on right now?
So just last week, we released version 4.5.5. So we're on the 4.5x kind of development line and trying to bring out what new features we can into that branch, and definitely bug fixes in that branch without disrupting the feature set too much, without breaking anyone's production. So there have been a number of new features there. 4.5.4 was what we kind of crafted this conversation around, and the features that were available in that release, and that's where some bigger features were released. 4.5.5 is mostly just bug fix and regular maintenance type stuff. We had a number of other issues that didn't quite make it into 4.5.5. But what the community side of Werewolf development has been trying to do recently is just stick to a monthly release cadence where we give out a point release, around the end of or beginning of a given month. So we expect 4.5.6, at the end of July, beginning of August, that kind of thing.
So on the point release, you're saying every month. What about the minor releases and the majors? Is there a schedule?
So yeah, the versioning of Werewolf doesn't quite match up with that traditional major minor bug fix thing, because 4 is so different. It's like a different product from Werewolf 3 that we don't really have a plan to change that. So within the version 4 kind of product nomenclature, the .5 and .6, 4.5 and 4.6 are probably what you would want to think of as a major release. And for those, we expect those to be the current plan, although this is relatively new, we haven't done this yet, is to have those twice a year, and try to line them up with the schedule for the ISC, the International Supercomputing Conference, and SC, the ACM Supercomputing Conference. So we're doing that in partnership with one of our larger distributors, the OpenHPC project. They are also trying to target releases around those timeframes to have the next version of OpenHPC available for people at that conference. And so we want them to have the next version of Werewolf in OpenHPC for that release for that conference. So we did that for 4.5, and we are planning to do that in time for SC for 4.6, but it remains to be seen.
We do have a question, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Oh, having a local disk with a swap space that is at least 2 times of the node image. The node would move inactive RAM pages to swap to free up system memory.
Yeah, so this is something that we have at least surmised in the past, but frankly, though I expected this to work in our testing, it has not. The memory of the OS image itself, at least the way Werewolf is provisioning it, seems to be pinned to memory in a way that it doesn't get swapped out to free it up. So we're not directing people to this expectation anymore. Oh, I may have lost you guys for a minute. Did I page out for a bit?
Oh, we can still hear you.
Okay, great. Your video froze for me, so maybe it was
like this,
sacrificing the video for the transmission. Yeah, so we want that to work, and I individually and we in the community do not yet understand why that is not working. It may be like the TempFS that Linux uses for the initial RAM disk behaves slightly differently than most TempFSs. So it might be that if we tweak how it's getting provisioned, or even if the way that we're doing it with Dracut now, that I'll show off in a bit, it might be that it will work in that circumstance, but we haven't tested it there yet. It should work, but it at least didn't in one of the tests that we ran.
Okay, say that again, Dracut. That's how it's pronounced?
Yes, or that's how I pronounce it anyway.
Okay.
So most Linux environments have what's called a 2-stage boot, where there's a really small OS image that gets built dynamically. And that thing is what gets started on your computer at first. There's like the bootloader, and then it runs this little Linux image, and that Linux image is responsible for starting up all of your hardware and then switching to the real Linux that's going to run. And so that 2 stages of a Linux boot is called a 2-stage boot. Werewolf has historically tried to avoid that in order to just for simplicity. We thought we didn't need it. We just treated the whole OS as one big image that we were going to send over the wire and let it boot. And if I can stop sharing here and share this other one. So this is my Werewolf server, and I've got one compute node connected to it, and it booted this Rocky 9 image, and that all worked just fine. It did exactly what I just described, where we just sent it one big image and it started. But I have this unnecessarily large Rocky 9 image that I can switch to, and if I switch back to my compute node again, not this, this one here. And start this up again. Oh, well, this is just still running from before. And tell it to reboot. And I'll let that go while I describe the issue. So this is one of those places where I'm liable to get into trouble because I have an understanding, or I think I have an understanding of what's going on, but we've struggled to really understand it because it seems to be very local system and local hardware dependent. Depending on the hardware you're running on and the environment you're running in, once your image gets to a certain size, you get crazy unpredictable errors that sometimes it would fail out before this point that you see here. Sometimes it would fail out later. I actually experienced a worst case scenario that I am baffled was even possible, of the boot succeeding, but then when I logged into it, there were files missing from the image, which I suspect is what's happening in a lot of the cases, but sometimes there are things that are missing that disrupt the boot so much that it fails, but other times the boot succeeded, but it didn't know that things were wrong. So the current thought process, the current understanding, modern x86 processors, where I say modern, like within the last quarter century, have different modes of operation, and I will kind of hand-wavingly refer to it as real mode and protected mode. And so the bootloader, right now the bootloader I'm using is a piece of software called iPixie. It's what Werewolf uses by default. The bootloader runs in real mode. It has direct access, and it runs the software that it's running in direct access to all of the hardware. There's no abstraction between the memory that your application is using and the memory that is on the hardware. My understanding, our current theory, is that these bootloaders were simply not built to manage this much memory in real mode. They're built to do a tiny little bit of work and then pass it off to something like Linux, which switches to protected mode and then does things in a much more safe and robust way. And when we started pumping gigabytes of image through these bootloaders, it sometimes is fine, but sometimes it doesn't know that your system is reserving some of the memory for some purpose, and it can't actually write there. And so it tries to write the image over some protected memory and then fails when it tries to boot. So here we have one of our failure modes. The kernel has started, and it appears to start booting, but then when it tries to access the root device, it just fails. And this is a slightly less common failure mode. In my experience, it usually fails before this, but this has been reliable for this image size. So what we've done is, and I'll stop sharing here and switch back to my server again real quick.
So it is somewhat predictable. Like, you had a pretty good idea it was going to happen.
It's predictable for a given platform. I'm on this server. I know that it does this in this. Oh, I shared the wrong thing again. It does this on this server. But if your server's firmware behaves differently, we've had people that can do tens of gigabytes of an image on their server with like a fully up-to-date firmware, fully up-to-date everything on that platform. And then it gives the bootloader enough memory in a big chunk that it doesn't cause a problem. But it's something to do with like bugs in your hardware's firmware, which, we can't build our software to say, well, it's everybody else's hardware's fault. You need to go fix that. Like, sometimes that's the that is an opinion that sometimes we encounter, but we can't do that, right? So we're looking for a solution. And so
So can I just interrupt you for 1 second, Jonathan?
yeah,
So
go for it.
I wasn't paying attention. Sorry. I mean, I was paying attention, but I didn't notice this part. Did it give you an error message? Like when you, oh my God, you froze in the best like little face for a second there, but that was fun. Yeah. So does it give you like the error message? And did you know that those packages, like how did you know that those packages were missing that first time?
Oh, that one time where I logged in and there were files just missing, it was because I had been working in that environment and I knew what was supposed to be there, and I was able to see that there were fewer files on the system than there were.
So there wasn't a notification. If you weren't familiar with it,
that's why I called that a worst case scenario. The worst case scenario is it fails and doesn't tell you. Errors are bad, but it fails and doesn't tell you is real bad. So we really needed to find a solution to that. I am totally lost on shares and things. So I can bring this back up and show you this one. So in this environment, yes, there's an error here. I think I can't. Oh yeah, my cursor is here. So we have no file system can mount and kernel panic. And there's some errors here. It's not necessarily clear why it is happening. But this is, I'm not going to boot anymore. Something is wrong. And we have to sort it out. So the solution for this that we have been working on, and this is, I refer to this as kind of a technical preview. It's working pretty well. We have a member of the community who's using this that has submitted some enhancements for it that didn't make it into 4.5.5, but I'm hopeful for them to make it into 4.5.6. So this is... We're going to stick using this Rocky 9 large image. So this one is too big for us to boot normally. And then because we're using the iPXE bootloader, we configure this one and we change this to Dracut. And this takes a little bit of time, but I'll let this go and then I'll describe what's happening here. So we'll get back to here, I think. And then I'll tell this to reboot. So it sounds a little bit complex, but it's not that different from what your computer normally does. It's just complex compared to what we were trying to accomplish with Werewolf. So Dracut, or with Werewolf, we now install a package into the compute node image that tells Dracut, this is a piece of software that's widely available. It's available for pretty much any modern distribution, definitely for Rocky Linux. It tells Dracut how to build an image, how to build a little, what's called an init-RD, an initial RAM disk, that normally what it does is start up and look for a disk on the local system and boot that. We added a module to it that lets it boot up and say, oh, I'm not supposed to boot from the local machine. I'm supposed to boot from a Werewolf server somewhere. And it gets some information from the Werewolf server during the initial boot that tells it where the server is and what image it should be starting. And that's what's happening here. I do wish that Dracut was a little bit more verbose about what's happening. This is happening in like this starting Dracut pre-mount hook, and there's a log file where it actually logs what's going on. But right here, it is running Dracut and then pulling the image. And so again, we were talking about this being fast. Like, this was like a 3 GB image, where the previous one was around 1 GB. And Dracut boot ends up actually being faster than a standard boot, even though we've got more layers of indirection, because Linux is so much better at moving that image across the network and doing the decompression than iPXE or even Grub are. So I mentioned we use iPXE for the bootloader here. That's the default. We also have Grub boot available as a technical preview similar to Dracut, and you can use Dracut with either of those. So here we are in our artificially large, it's really just got like a 2 GB file that's been placed in the root directory. We have this large image that just got pushed across the network. Didn't work before, and with the Dracut boot that we have now, we can do that. And so we've pushed this up to frankly, the amount of memory that I have available in my test environment without any trouble. So this will continue to mature, and we'd love for people to get involved either on the community side, or if you're a CIQ customer and you are using or interested in Werewolf, We'd love to get this into your hands and get your thoughts on it and get your experience with it and continue to improve and mature this technique, this additional method of booting with Werewolf, so that because it's just better in a lot of ways. It's a little bit more complex, but it makes the whole system so much more flexible.
Also seemed like it made it a little faster.
Yes, and then this is the thing. So in the past, we were just dependent on we were dependent on Linux's ability to just take an image off the network and handle it. Now, since we're doing that intentionally and purposefully, we're pulling that image ourselves and putting it somewhere and then booting into it. We have more control over where that image goes. And so that's where right now we create a temporary file system in memory and load the image in there. But once we did that, we were like, wait a minute, we could just have it nominate some random storage locally on the system and say, let's put it there instead. And so in the future, this should let us completely obviate the need, if you care about this kind of thing, to load the image into memory. You could just load it into local storage somewhere.
And then it would persist past reboot?
So right now the plan is to have it not be stateful, to not have it persist between reboots. You could imagine that it could do that it could say, oh, look, I have an image there and I can tell that it's the same image that I'm being told to boot and there's not a newer one. Some kind of cache invalidation would have to happen there so it knows if it needs to pull a new one or not. Right now the plan is just to always load the image statelessly across the network like we already do, but instead of writing it out to memory, write it to local storage.
So I can still imagine you could still have like a logs directory that persisted so that you could actually go back and look at what happened.
And we can do that today.
Okay.
Yeah, we can do that today. So one of the bits of stateless configuration you can get from the server is you have some local disks, mount them for things like local scratch, for logs. If you're a database server, maybe you store your database there. We have one of our customers is running a BGFS parallel file system, and the whole thing is managed with Werewolf, which sounds so counterintuitive that you would run your file system with a stateless cluster management system. But it let us very cleanly delineate between what is the state of the file system itself, where does that live, and what is the file system software, the operating system, all of those things. And so it's a really good situation. If they want to add nodes to their file system cluster, they can just plug another one in and tell the server to make it a file system node, and it just starts up and works correctly. So yeah, you can definitely have state, but that's different than the operating system itself, the system being stateful.
Awesome. Yeah, let's put up Kevin's question here. Hey, Kevin, what's up, man? Thanks for watching. We know Kevin. All right, he says, I wonder which is more safe default between iPXE and Dracut.
Yeah, so yeah, and I would nuance this a little bit. It's like whether we would use Dracut or not. We're using iPXE in either situation, either iPXE or Grub. The thing with at least the way we have Dracut implemented today, in order for that to work, there has to be Dracut support in your image. And so we're publishing a package, a new Werewolf Dracut package that you have to install inside of your image in order to allow that image to be booted via Werewolf with Dracut. But until we find a way around that, where you can just boot an arbitrary image, we will probably stick with not having Dracut on by default, and then just have really good documentation or maybe some pointers in the UI saying, hey, if this image is beyond this size, you might want to consider using Dracut for boot, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Kevin. Good to see you.
We got one more.
Another question?
Yep, right there.
Okay, Gary, what's up? Any guidance for scaling the performance of the Pixie server to the number of nodes? Does it reach a point where it is best to stagger boots or to get multiple Pixie servers?
Yeah, so my recommendation here, just kind of drawing from like what I would do if I were using this in a production environment, I would scale my Werewolf server to be capable of booting a rack of compute. So there's individual servers, and then maybe you have like a multi-server chassis of some kind, and then there's some set of nodes in a rack. I would try and make it so that I can boot a rack of servers at a time, just turn them all on. And then, because this is the way I would turn on a large system when I was a sysadmin. Turning the entire system on all at once has its own problems, and that is the unit of bring up that I liked to use. If you need to scale, because that's the thing, Werewolf's performance sensitivity is really only an issue at that initial turn on. Once everything's running, it's a pretty low, it's not a performance sensitive operation or requirement. So that's what I would do. But if you really needed to scale it, we've seen people do a Werewolf server per rack. Like maybe you have a top of rack Werewolf server that does that. There's ways that you can cache what Werewolf is providing out. Ultimately, the image and the image and the overlays just come over an HTTP server, so you could put a cache in front of that. But what we've mostly talked about in the past is just having multiple Werewolf servers, using static DHCP, so it doesn't matter which server ends up responding to a given node, they'll just get the same answer regardless, and then scaling it that way. So there's a few ways around it, and we would like to formalize that a bit. But for the most part, people have been able to take what's there and make it work, even if it's not like a first-class part of the product yet.
Are those different choices or different types of architectures documented? Is that a part of the documentation? You said formalize it. So
I don't know if it's part of the community documentation. We've written some articles about it at CIQ, and I think we've published some of that, but at the very least, we've shared it with customers, and for sure could in the future.
Thank you.
On the community side, this is kind of a side question. How common and frequent do you get requests for a GUI?
So within the community, not very often. But the people that tend to join a cluster management Slack channel tend to be the kind of people that are, they're very command line comfortable. I personally would be interested in a GUI for Werewolf, but there's a couple of kind of first this, then that steps to get there. And it's a lot of work. And most of that is about having a fully featured API that a GUI can call into Werewolf with. And I've got, grand visions, and we talk within the steering committee about what it would look like to get there. But on the community side, most of the time, we've just been focusing on the core product. We've also talked about that maybe being something that CIQ might be able to commit time to, but it would depend on having the right partner to drive that, and that has that need, that request, and that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting being a company that, we provide support and training for Werewolf in a variety of different ways, but then Werewolf is its own, open source, community driven. It's got its own thing going on. And of course, we want to put all of those links in the chat for you guys. You can also go to ciq.com, and there'll be like a little Werewolf section where it gives all the information for the community. So I think of that too. And one of the reasons why I bring it up is if there's someone out there that has that skill set that would also like to see it, that might be a wonderful place where they can kind of get involved, is in the community.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I'd like to think that we're actually, there are different kinds of open source communities. Sometimes the community aspect of it is mostly around you can submit a bug if you like. But we try to be really welcoming to new contributors at pull requests too. So if you have functionality that you want to see in Werewolf, and you would prefer to engage with Werewolf through the community rather than, let's say, a support contract with CIQ, that kind of thing, awesome. Come hang out. There will be someone, myself, or a number of other people, an increasingly large number of people in the Werewolf Slack that would love to talk with you about that and point you in the right direction, give feedback on any code changes that you're thinking about, and new functionality. I see Zach, hi Zach, asking about a text user interface instead of a GUI. That's not something that I individually have really thought about. I think by the time you have a text user interface, you're already logged into the server. And so maybe something that's kind of like that, if I can put up another, I did this earlier. but I didn't really remark on it. So one of the things that something like a GUI or even a text user. So for people that don't know these terms, so there's like the command line interface that's like node list, and you execute a command and you get a response back, and you're at a shell like this. And then a GUI, what we've imagined for Werewolf would be something like a web interface that you can log into and then see the nodes that are in your cluster and the containers, the images that are associated with them, status, that kind of thing. But one of the big benefits of a GUI, aside from not having to deal with the command line, is discoverability. You have to know what commands exist or know how to get help about the commands in order to use a command line. And sometimes it can be intimidating.
Mm.
But a GUI alleviates that by showing you, hey, these are things you might care about. Here's some status. Here's some here's buttons to click on instead of you have to know the commands. But a text user interface is kind of in between those, where I'm trying to think if I have an example. Well, do I have? No, I don't have either of them. It's an application that would run on the command line, but instead of just being command and response, would be a user interface with maybe options, and you can let's see. Here we go. The network manager text user interface. This is an example. So I can run nmcli and make changes to my network on this system, or I can use this thing and not quite click around in it, but I can see what's available and make changes here. So the question is, what about something like this for Werewolf? And the closest that we have to it is that instead of like node set, where you have to know like that the container option sets the image that you're going to boot and know the syntax for this, we've added this node edit, and then we also have an overlay edit and a profile edit, things like this. And this opens your node that you want to change in a text buffer and lets you change it interactively. So up here in the comments, we have examples of things you might set for this node. And then down here, we have the node itself, and you can make these changes directly. And you could change this in the configuration file directly, but doing this lets Werewolf know that you're making the change and lets it update the server and make other changes that need to happen to reflect the modification you're making here. So this is kind of moving in that direction. It's not a full TUI in that sense, but trying to make it a little bit more discoverable, a little bit more approachable, insofar as we have capacity to right now.
Thank you for the question, Zachary. That was good.
Yeah, awesome.
I also like links. I haven't seen that in a long time.
Too bad I didn't have it installed. Sometimes
I know.
Awesome. Okay, so slides.
Yeah.
Do we have a slides presentation? Oh, Philip. Hello, Philip. Enabling bash completion, if it isn't by default, is a huge help. Double tapping tab usually shows the available options with wwctl.
Yeah, this is something that Christian Goal over at SUSE, he's a member of the Werewolf community and a member of the technical steering community technical steering committee for Werewolf. He's been just banging this out. It's great. Not only does it tab complete like the subcommands for Werewolf, but it'll also tab complete the things like I think container names, but definitely overlay files. And so before, you had to just kind of know what was in your overlay and just type it all, and just it was not a great experience. But now, if we can switch back over to this again, I can say like wwctl overlay edit, and then see, here's my list of overlays, and then tab complete. Oh, it's not working. Maybe I don't have the latest version installed on this environment, because it has definitely worked in the past. Let's see if it works in is it show. Here it's working. Debug, and then it sees the files that are in it, and that is just so much better of an experience. And then I can say like render this for node 1, and we can see what this file looks like when it runs on that node. And in the past, you just had to know these file names or go look at them on the file system, which was not great. I'm gonna have to file a bug for the fact that this is not working for the edit subcommand.
Still very cool.
Very
Yeah.
cool.
Back to your slides question though.
Oh yeah, do we have some slides that you want to share with us?
Yeah, so I gave a presentation at the Rocky Mountain Advanced Computing Consortium maybe a month ago now, that was more generally speaking about getting involved in open source and open source communities. And I would like to invite anyone watching who's interested in Werewolf or is using Werewolf to come join our community. And a big part of my the story that I was telling was that these things aren't just software projects; they are communities, and communities are made of people. And so I wanted to kind of present each of these. Well, in the presentation, I talked about Werewolf, and I talked about Aptainer, and I talked about Rocky Linux, and I talked about OpenHPC. Just talking about Werewolf today. But yeah, I just figured we could put some of this up. Like, if you're interested in getting involved in Werewolf, we have a really well-populated Slack. You can see Zach talking there in this screenshot that I took before, actually. The Werewolf Slack is great, and I couldn't be happier with not only the members of the steering committee and their involvement there, but also with the user community that has just joined and supported the project really, really well. One of my favorite things is seeing a new person show up and ask a question and have a user that I don't know answering the question or at least trying to provide help. And that's great. And if we talked about how Werewolf 4 is very different from Werewolf 3 and things that came before it. But even a fair bit of the Werewolf 3 community has joined here. You can see there in the left bar that we've got a Werewolf 3 channel. So if you are still running Werewolf 3 and are looking for people to get help with there, you can join the same community, talk with some of the original maintainers of Werewolf 3 over there. They're still providing some help for people that are still running it. And then, you're all plugged in with the people that are doing Werewolf 4 as well, if and when you are ready to switch to that. There's twice monthly right now Werewolf steering committee meetings. This made more sense before when it was in a conference room, but those meetings are open to the public. If you're interested, I recommend joining the Werewolf Slack and then asking for an invite, and I'd be happy, or someone would be happy to send you the invite for that. They're on Wednesday, I think. Right now, I forget. I go when it's on my calendar. We tried to we were trying to split it between like just technical steering stuff and community focused stuff, but we haven't really done a good job of starting up that bespoke community meeting. We're hoping to do that maybe after August, but for now, come to this meeting. We've got a whole part in our agenda where we say hi to anyone that's new and ask what's going on, if there's any help you need. And the notes for that are open to the public as well. Actually, I think it's the notes that are behind that QR code. If you want to check out what we've been talking about and see how the project gets run and how we make decisions, that kind of thing. And then because products are made of people, I just wanted to let people know some of the faces and names behind the project. So, people will know Greg Kurtzer there at the top. He's the.
I think we're not sharing. I don't think we're looking at the same slide.
Oh my.
Yeah, we're still looking at the one with the Slack channel, with the Werewolf Slack channel.
Weird. What's going
on? With Greg and.
Okay, just a moment.
Christian, I believe his name is.
Oh, now.
Correct. Yeah, thank you.
Here we
there
go.
You go.
There we go.
See? Nope. Yeah,
so
okay,
the QR code I was talking about.
There we go. Yep, thank you.
We did see the Slack channel before.
Yes.
Okay,
So,
man.
Yes.
Mac OS has changed this behavior where it doesn't update windows that aren't visible to the screen. And I've noticed this with YouTube, where if there's a video playing in the background, if I tab back over to it, it like has to catch up. but that's what's going on here. I had the actual display window behind other windows, so it was like, oh, I don't need to change that. Okay, so kind of top left there, people will know Greg Kurtzer, our fearless CEO and creator of Werewolf in the first place, and Werewolf 4 in specific. But Christian, who I mentioned, is pictured next to him. You can see me there in the bottom left. And then John Grisnog Hanks works at CZ BioHub. He kind of represents the user community in a lot of ways. He uses and provides feedback on Werewolf and provides a lot of really valuable production experience to the steering committee. And then Jeremy Seidel on the bottom right works with Intel and helps keep us plugged into OpenHPC and other kind of industry interests that are stakeholders for Werewolf. And then Jason Yang on the right he's another CIQ developer and has just been doing a lot of great work in Werewolf where, if there's a bug, I can just kind of assign it. I say, hey, Jason, could you take a look at this? And when he lives in Japan, so I do that at the end of my day. And then when I wake up in the morning, the bug is fixed. And it's a great experience. And then like some ideas for how to, if you're coming from the community or you're interested in the community, we're always looking for people to help do documentation work. It's definitely getting better. Documentation has been a little bit of we've been behind on it for a while, but we're iterating with each release, and now we have it split out properly. So we have 4.5.x branch for our docs, as well as a main branch, so that we're kind of documenting the release behavior separately from the development behavior, and keeping those up to date. That's been going really well. And then we're, as I mentioned, hoping to have a more dedicated community meeting where maybe we highlight our user community and what people are actually using Werewolf for. I got to see a really great presentation, exactly like what I'm hoping to see from Arizona State at the Rocky Mountain Advanced Computing Consortium. It's wonderful to see someone in the user community giving a presentation on Werewolf and how they're using it. So we're hoping to do more of that. And if that sounds like something that you'd be interested in, get in touch. We're looking for people to help organize that. And then, I didn't know I left this slide in here. I passed out a sign-up sheet as part of the presentation that I gave for people looking to get involved. But then, there's a bunch of bugs, and if you're, as there always are, and opportunities for enhancement. And if you are a developer or you want to get into Go programming, Werewolf is a really great, approachable code base for a systems person who generally knows or wants to learn more about how this kind of systems management works. I did not know Go before getting involved with Werewolf, and this has been a really great code base to get to know Go through. And then these were kind of my top of line, generic, getting involved in an open source community pieces of advice. Part of my narrative was I had struggled in high school and college to start getting involved in open source stuff, and I kept trying to look at it as like a software problem, and I could just pick a piece of software off the shelf and start contributing to it, as though that's how it works. But my advice is to contribute to projects that you already use. If you're using Werewolf, you will get value out of contributing to it. It's a really cool experience to put code into a project and then immediately get to benefit from it, and then see other people benefit from it. Join the Werewolf Slack. It's great, and you'll get a lot out of it. You're welcome to show up at meetings. People that have done that recently reported that they got a lot out of seeing how the project is run and how decisions get made, how, what we're thinking about, what our priorities are. And then, reach out to the active contributors, people that you see committing, but also the steering committee members. We love to talk about the project. So reach out on Slack, reach out in any way. And then if you really want to do stuff like help run a community meeting, when you hear opportunities like that, say, yes, I will do it, even if it sounds a little bit scary, and there will be support. The whole point is it's a community and no one has to do anything alone. So let us know whatever interests you, and we'll do our best to get you plugged in and enabled.
Awesome. No, well said, Jonathan. Well said. I really appreciate you going over the value and the benefits and how to get involved in the community and giving some people guidance around that, because those are questions that we get all the time. Like, how do I get involved? And I mean, of course, once you do it, it seems simple and obvious, but if you have not ever done it yet, you're not even really sure where to start. So that was very helpful. I can't believe we're already like 10 minutes to the hour.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I feel like we still have like a whole nother hour that we could go talking about all the things that we want to talk about with Werewolf today. But I definitely want to give you just a few minutes to kind of wrap up and make sure that you get out the updates and things like that you really want to share.
Mostly the thing I was most excited about and the thing I wanted to demo was the Dracut stuff. There are other features. I was showing the ability to edit. I showed editing the node. You can edit overlays. We fixed some really cool. Well, the bugs were not cool, but it is cool that we have fixed them. We also have made some improvements to syncuser if you're using that functionality. There was some inefficiencies in how that was happening that for large user counts ended up being a problem. That's been resolved. But we're adding new features and fixing bugs all the time. In the future, we're working on better support for IPv6, especially in IPv6 only environments. We want to have similar efficiency improvements for the container list command, which for technical reasons is kind of slow right now for certain large containers. And maybe the biggest one is we think there's a lot of power in the overlay system, but it is awkward to use because all the overlays come from a single place that the system overlays are in. So we're going to break those out and make it easier to mix and match the overlays that you want to use, and then mix those with overlays that you're developing locally and manage those separately. Maybe some overlays will come from a package that you install from a provider like CIQ that's giving you overlays to configure a piece of software that you want support for, but maybe you also want to manage some overlays in a Git repository somewhere and track that separately. We're hoping to improve support for that. So there's always new stuff, always cool and exciting things happening. And if you'd like to know more, just come join Slack, join a community meeting, look at the notes, look in the GitHub issues. The milestones are pretty well organized in there too these days. And if you want to see what we're looking at for 4.5.x or 4.6.0, it's all right there.
Jonathan, do you want to mention the CentOS 7?
Oh, thank you. Yes. So at some point in the recent past, I think it may have been 4.5.3, but one of the recent 4.5 releases, we went ahead and dropped support for CentOS 7. This is something that we've been, holding on to for a while, but has become more and more difficult. And now that CentOS 7 is itself end of life, we just decided to stop worrying about it. So we kept encountering Go libraries that didn't work on CentOS 7 that we couldn't upgrade to. And GitHub has a function that it runs called Dependabot that tells you about security problems in your dependencies. And we had a number of those that we wanted to update and fix, and doing so broke compatibility with CentOS 7. So with the EOL of that distribution, we decided to just go for it. You can still manage CentOS. So this is worth clarifying. You can still have CentOS 7 compute nodes, and that's fine. Werewolf can still manage a CentOS 7 compute environment. It just can't run the server on CentOS 7 anymore. So yeah, to run in a supported environment with the latest release, you need a Rocky 8 or Rocky 9 or SUSE Leap environment or SLES environment. Those are all supported platforms within the Werewolf project. I think Leap 15 something is the version there. But yeah, no longer CentOS 7.
Thank you. Wanted to make sure we got that out there.
Yes, thank you. It was in the notes, but we were just talking.
It's been yelling at me the whole time. Such a hot topic.
Yeah, it sure is. Okay, so are there any final thoughts before we wrap up here, Jonathan? Oh, Kyle. Hey, Kyle. That's a fun picture. Is Raspberry Pi suitable as a Werewolf server?
There is a whole single board computer channel on the Werewolf Slack full of very passionate individuals running Werewolf, both server and compute, on Raspberry Pi. I can't think of any reason why the server couldn't run on a Pi. That's just fine. There are some complexities in mixed architecture environments. So the Raspberry Pi is an ARM environment. If you're then trying to provision x86 servers with it, it's possible you can do it, but there are complexities around it, and it's not necessarily how it's meant to work. If you happen to be trying to boot other ARM machines, it should be fine. Booting compute nodes that are running on Raspberry Pi can sometimes be a struggle, and that's where a lot of that community interest is coming from. My understanding, and I am far from an expert, is that the Raspberry Pi bootloader or boot environment is notoriously unreliable, and getting it to network boot reliably has been a hobby project. I'll put it that way. It is definitely not a project targeted supported platform. But if you are wanting to do that, there is a community of people that will be very happy to have you.
Yes, Dr. Sill is very excited about doing that.
Oh man, he's got a specific project that's just so cool. It's like a single motherboard kind of environment that has slots for compute modules, and so his whole platform, his whole like product, the thing he's working on building and has working is a Werewolf server in a box, where both the Werewolf server itself and all the compute nodes in the cluster are just in this one machine that you could imagine a computer science department could use for teaching and instruction in a class, and make that really cheap to buy, really cheap to build, and easy to manage. And that whole thing runs Werewolf, and it's great.
Awesome.
It's very cool.
Okay, Martin Herman coming in strong here at the top of the hour almost with a question that might take more than 30 seconds to answer. So I am going to encourage you to go to the community, but he would like your suggestion on the best 101 step-by-step to install Werewolf in a brand new hardware. I have a lab configuration of 2 Ethernet networks with 3 computers for Werewolf, Slurm, and the login node, and 9 compute nodes.
Yeah, that sounds fine. In terms of like what's missing there, that seems like a reasonable starting point. You really only need 1 Ethernet network for the provisioning, so 1 network that all those nodes are on. You can boot the login nodes with Werewolf. There are a lot of people that do that, and we even recommend it. You just need to have some kind of shared NFS that can come off the Werewolf server as well. But there's a quick start guide on the Werewolf documentation website. There's one for Rocky Linux or I think it's written as Enterprise Linux, but one for Rocky Linux and one for SUSE. And I think there's a new one for Debian, though it might be incomplete at this point. All of those have a little bit of, they need a little bit of hand holding. We're working on getting those improved. So if you use one of those quick start guides and have questions, that's a great reason to join the Slack, and we get questions like that all the time, and then take those issues, those questions that people have, and roll them into documentation improvements whenever we can.
Yeah, awesome. We're looking forward to seeing you in the Slack channel, Martin. If you want to link to that, pretty easy. I mean, you can go to werewolf.org. You can also go to ciq.com and find some links there to the community. And then, of course, if you would like our help, right, at CIQ, we do provide support, training, implementation. There's all sorts of things that we can do to help you get your Werewolf environment up and running and functioning properly. So, Jonathon, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing, both Absolutely. At CIQ and in the community, and everyone in the community working on the project.
It's good to see everybody.
Thank you so much for the conversation. It's great.
We'll have to do another one because we still have. There's a lot of bullet points we didn't get through, Jonathon.
Yeah,
there's a lot.
But especially with these monthly releases, right? Like, okay, so we'll see you back here same time next month. All right. Thank you guys. Have a wonderful day. Make sure that you like and subscribe, and go to ciq.com and you can ask any questions there, and we'll get back to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
See you.